All right. Our first piece of content, which we're really excited to put online. So welcome everyone to our YouTube channel or Instagram if you're watching on Instagram. My name is Sunny. I'm the founder and owner of StrivePath. And then with us, we've got Cole Philippek, one of our consultants. Welcome, Cole.
Hey, how's it going?
So just a bit about StrivePath before we get started. So we are a leader in academic and college advising, and we're based out in the Bay Area. And our whole motto is we empower students and families with personalized academic and college advising, market insights, and community resources, and we ensure holistic development and just better outcomes. So that's us. Now, the content we're going to talk about today is a hotly discussed content among our student families, and that is standardized tests, the SAT and the ACT. And I think before we kick off, actually, Cole, you've got quite a bit of background when it comes to the SAT and ACT, right? Can you just share a bit more about that?
Yeah, so this is basically my 17th year working with students on the SAT and ACT. I've gone through various recommendations as the tests have evolved, but I can tell you right now, just a little teaser, my recommendation is strongly for the ACT right now, and we'll get to that in a little bit.
Yep. Yep. I love it. So we're going to answer a few questions actually as we kind of go through this Q&A. And so the first question that we often get asked is, why even take the SAT or ACT? So Cole, what are your thoughts there?
Okay, I'm going to start with the controversial answer, which is why should you not take the test? Sometimes in California, we have students who want to go to community college. They want to go to CSUs, that's Cal State schools, or they want to go to UCs and they're applying nowhere else. Well, the first thing I would say to them is, are you sure you don't want to apply anywhere else? Because sometimes applying to private school based on financial aid can actually be more affordable. They can give you a better financial aid offer than a UC will or a CSU. However, if a student is dead set on community college or one of the UCs or CSUs, those schools are all test blind. They will not look at your test. So it's a waste of time and energy and money as well to study for the SAT or ACT if you're going to one of those schools.
So the next question, Cole, is so that's why that's the controversial take, right? So now why should one take it?
There are a lot of benefits to taking it.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, most sort of prestigious schools many schools are saying that they're test optional, but many schools are pushing toward required tests. Every month we hear about a new school that is now requiring the SAT or ACT. That's one reason to take it, is because most schools, even if they don't require it, they strongly prefer it. And we have a slide that supports that.
Yep, that's exactly it. And actually, so here, so to your point, just this year, actually, we heard of a number of schools that are re-requiring it. So Yale, Dartmouth, Brown have started to re-require it. And this is in many ways like what we suspected would happen last year. It's kind of like it's the bounce back from COVID. Similarly to how a lot of us parents are having to drive back to work, there's a bit of a bounce back now with respect to having standardized tests in place. And even for the schools that said they were test optional, we looked at their data. And here's what I thought was actually really interesting. So let me just pull up some data here. And by the way, for those who are curious, it's pretty easy to find out which schools are re-requiring the test. So one, you can just do a Google search. And secondly, we're obviously here to help too. And but third, if there are schools that are on your list, you can easily look them up. And they should be pretty transparent with respect to their testing policies. So let me actually just pull this up. So this is, I'm going to zoom in. All right. So by comparison, I'd say 43% of students who applied to college submitted their standardized test scores. Now take a look at some of these schools. So at Bowdoin, 88% of their enrolled students submitted an SAT or ACT. Yale, 88%, Harvard, 83%. Now, this, by the way, is before these schools re-required or re-mandated the SAT or ACT. So in other words, even though they say they're test optional, when you look at their data, they show a high inclination or high receptivity to having standardized test scores for their applicants.
Right. And just to be clear, that right column, that is the percent of students who enrolled at the
Yes.
school. And so if you look at Harvard, 83% of students who enroll at Harvard submit an SAT or ACT score. That is really high.
Yep. That's almost double what the national average is. And so it's actually, so I think Cole really kind of gets back to your point, which is it would be in your best interest to take the SAT or the ACT. And given that many schools are starting to re-require them, it's only going to be more in your best interest to do so.
And there's another reason why it's beneficial to take the SAT or ACT. If you study and you study a lot and you get a very good score, you can apply to schools that you would consider backup schools. And they will offer you really strong financial aid packages. We have students, we had a student last year who got into Ivy League schools, and she ended up going to Texas because Texas basically offered her a full ride. Do you remember what her SAT score was?
I think it was in the 1500s.
Right. And so Texas really wanted that 1500, 1560, whatever it was, SAT score. And so they offered her a lot of money.
Yep.
So it can help you not just get into school, but also can help you afford school.
So that brings up the next question, which is, when would it not make sense for a student to study or to take on the SAT or the ACT?
So currently, SAT scores are inflated. If you look at what an average school's SAT score is, you're going to see it's like a 1400, a 1350, and these are in the 95th to 99th percentile scores.
Yep.
And it's kind of like, who are these students who are getting consistently 98th percentile scores? So what's happened during COVID and with these test optional scores is students are only submitting 1300 plus SAT scores, and it's just inflating everything. And if a student has an 1150, they're no longer submitting that.
Yep.
So my recommendation is, let's say you're testing at 1100 and you don't have the money to hire a tutor, you don't have the time, maybe you do a lot of extracurriculars, and you're looking at a long road of studying and spending money to improve your 1100 to a 1400. And if you don't have that time or money, I would say don't do it.
Yep.
Spend your time on your extracurriculars, spend your time on your grades.
Yep. And just something else too, right, is this is one of the issues with test optional is, Cole, to your point, you're naturally going to get scores that approach 1600.
Yeah.
But now I think what'll be interesting is what'll happen to scores after these tests have been remandated. And my bet is you're going to start to see the scores actually come down.
Yes, they definitely will.
Yeah. So that should actually be, I think, I'd say reassuring to a lot of applicants in that, both for like these, selective colleges that have remandated it, not only will you start to see scores kind of come down and normalize back to maybe what they were before, but additionally, the acceptance rates actually might start to go up now because these schools have reinstituted a bar that was taken away that also led to like a massive influx in applications.
Right.
Yep. Okay. So now the next question though is, how do you do well on the SAT or the ACT?
So there's a whole bunch of ways to study for the test. Now, the first thing is that I want everyone to know that the SAT and ACT, they're not aptitude tests. They don't test how smart you are. They test how much you have practiced that test. So the more you practice the ACT, the better your score will get.
Yep.
You put in 30 hours, you're going to get a good score. But if you put in 100 hours of practice on the ACT, you will get a great score. It makes a big difference to hire an experienced one-on-one tutor. There's lots of statistics that show if you sign up for a Kaplan class or a big like Compass tutoring or AJ tutoring or any big tutoring class, that those will help your score. But if you really want to get a top score, hiring a one-on-one tutor, which can be very expensive, we're looking at $5,000 sometimes or more, that can really boost your score. Alternatively, you can try to do it at home, but you have to stay motivated. You have to keep taking practice tests. And if you do that, you will improve your score. The more you practice, the better your score will get. My basic recommendation is take practice tests and go over every answer you got wrong. If you guessed and you got it right, I'd say you can leave it alone. You could go over it if you want, but really your focus is on answers you got wrong. And if you keep correcting and examining the answers you got wrong over time, your score will improve.
Yep. So to recap, so one, um, having the time, right, allocated to it, but then also having a project plan and keeping yourself accountable will be helpful. And that's also, I think, where a lot of the tutors can come and play, and they can be very, very helpful there too, right? As you almost have like an external checks and balance. And the other strong recommendation that you suggested was one-on-one versus the classroom tutor, which quite honestly, that's also something that I experienced as well. Was I didn't really take on classroom tutoring because I didn't feel like it was moving at the pace that I needed to move at. And so that's also really, really good guidance.
There is Khan Academy is available. There are other online programs that are really affordable. Those, in my experience, only a select few students can really handle the Khan Academy tutoring. Most students find it pretty boring and overwhelming. So if that works for you, it's a great resource. But for the vast majority of students, it's going to be really challenging, and it's going to be hard for you to be motivated to do it over and over again. Instead, what I would recommend is get books by, if you're doing the SAT, get the College Board book, get the Kaplan book, and get the Princeton Review book. Kaplan and Princeton Review are usually the best. They have the best material. And the same for the ACT. Get the ACT book by the Wiley Company, and then who makes the ACT, and then do the Kaplan and Princeton Review. And between them, you should have enough tests to practice up to 100 hours.
Yep. Now that brings up the other question, which I think you had answered at the very start, which is the SAT or the ACT. And I think as we answer this question, there's obviously some important changes for us to highlight with respect to the SAT. So do you want to kick off first with like the changes that have been?
Sure.
Yeah.
So the SAT is now adaptive. And what basically that means is that if you do well on the first section of the SAT, there's two sections on the math and the verbal. The second section will be significantly harder. And that's it's also digital, it's online. So, but my biggest complaint with the new SAT is that as a tutor, I don't have enough sample practice tests, some real practice tests to help my students prepare. So my students over the past 6 months who've been taking the digital SAT have been reporting that they've been getting really low scores on these hard sections. The hard sections have been crushing them. So my recommendation is, if you're going to study a lot, go with something that you know, which is the ACT. The ACT is an incredibly predictable test. Whereas the SAT is, I really don't know what's coming on that math, and we don't have a good way to help you prepare for it.
So let's go through these then. So, okay, so we've quickly like recapped, I'd say, some of the big differences. So cool. Like, let's do this one more time. So SAT now it's digital, right? Which means it's got to be taken in front of a computer.
Yep.
So what happens if you have like a learning difference?
Yeah, if you have ADHD, sometimes the SAT will give you accommodations and print out the test for you. But let's say you have ADHD and it's not diagnosed and you don't have accommodations, I would just recommend taking a sample test online on a computer and seeing how that works for you. You might need to have the paper. I know that when I was studying for the LSAT, I had to have the physical paper in front of me. I could not focus on a computer. That's just the way that I test.
Yep, exactly. And then it's also adaptive now. So what does that mean?
It really, it doesn't mean that much. I think it just means that right now, I think that we can sort of ignore the adaptive part and
Okay.
instead focus on there's not a lot of study material available, and that the harder questions are even harder now than even than they used to be.
Yep. Yeah, and that's actually a really big thing. So one, harder to study for when there's less stuff out there to use to
Yep.
study. But then the other thing too, actually, and this does go to the adaptive thing, is, for a lot of our folks, for a lot of our students who are going into, computer science or going into dev or product, I mean, the first iteration of a product is never perfect. And the digital SAT really went, I'd say, online this year. And so it's a pretty new product. And so there's still, I'd say, some kinks that they're working out. So just overall, I think it's a bit more unpredictable than what has been kind of tried, tested, and true, which is the ACT.
Mhm.
So now let's go to the ACT. So by comparison, paper versus digital. So if you have a student who is much more comfortable with than much more comfortable like working with pad and paper than looking at a computer screen, that's obviously huge, right? What about accommodations? Are accommodations just as easy to get for the ACT than the SAT?
This is a good question. My recommendation for families with learning differences is always apply for accommodations with both tests and
Yep.
then go with whatever test gives you the better accommodations. This is a long process. Often parents have to do it, but it's worth it. Okay. Students, you deserve those accommodations. Get them. Please get them. Okay. And take the test that offers the better accommodations.
Yep.
It's
Awesome.
we don't know ahead of time if the SAT or the ACT. It's pretty random which one will provide better accommodations.
Yep. I like that a lot. Now the ACT is a longer test with longer reading passages.
Yeah.
Um, but it's
What
got
this
easier
means,
questions. Yeah.
what this means is that students will actually gravitate towards the SAT and the shorter reading passages at first.
Yep.
After practice, if they practice enough and they get their attention span honed in, the ACT, even though it's a longer passages, the questions are easier. So it's more uncomfortable because you have to read and focus for 95 lines instead of 8 lines. But once you get good at it, the questions are easier.
Yep. And there's a strategy too, right, with taking the ACT because um, I feel like there are patterns you can start to see in some of the questions.
Yes, yes. It's a more predictable test. And again, there's tons of study material out there.
Yep.
The math is way easier to study for. The reading and the grammar are actually fairly similar to the SAT.
Yep.
Now, what we should add on the ACT is that there is the bonus science section. And this really
Mm.
drives students crazy. And I'll just give you one quick tip for the ACT science,
Yep.
which is um, you should not read the passages on most sections. Instead, consider it a test of graphs. And so you're going to have a really hard time on that science section at first. But once you figure out how they ask the questions, once you figure out that they're just asking you where the lines meet on the graph, then you can start to score well on that science section.
That's right.
I also if you can find a skilled tutor for just the science section, it makes a big difference.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense. So I think kind of looking at all this, really, I think our conclusion is take the ACT just given how much more I think predictability there is with the test.
Yes.
Um, we might start to shift our recommendation, right, as we kind of like enter the end of this year and maybe like the start of next year. But just right now, the SAT is a bit of a wild, wild west, and there's just not
Yes.
a lot of stuff that you can use to
I
prepare for it.
I agree with one caveat.
Yeah.
If you're planning on studying for 30 hours or less, I'd recommend the SAT. Okay, it takes less time to study for, it's
Yep.
harder to master, Everyone is struggling. Whether you spend 100 hours or 25, it's hard to study for that.
Yep.
So if you're going to spend fewer hours studying, take the SAT. More hours studying, take the ACT.
Yep. Awesome. Cool. So I'm going to stop sharing then. So that was super helpful. And then where did we go? There we are. So now we talked about why take it, when not to take it, which one to take, how to study. Other question would be when. When does one start to prepare for the SAT, ACT?
This is a good question. So doing well on both of the tests, the further you get along in math, it's pretty hard to do well on these tests until you've taken Algebra 2 and
Yeah.
completed Algebra 2. So if you're going into Algebra 2 as a junior, it makes sense to take the SAT or ACT towards the end of your junior year after you've completed the test. Now, it makes sense to take it towards the end of your junior year anyway.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I usually recommend sometime between March and July. March and June of your junior year, and July as a rising senior. If you let it drag into September, October of your senior year, what ends up happening is that ends up impacting your college applications. And so it's just better to get it out of the way sooner. Even
Yep.
if you have to take this test during AP testing in May or April,
Yep.
it's still worth it. There's only one group of students who really want to take it before December. I could say two groups of students. If you know that you already have a perfect score, go ahead and take it as a freshman. If you're one of those geniuses, right? Take it whenever you're ready, right?
Yep.
As soon as you're ready for the test, go ahead and take it. But also athletes, a lot of schools will recruit athletes and they want to know what your SAT or ACT score is. And so for recruited athletes, it can really make a difference to get a score on the books,
Yeah.
even if it's not your best score. And in that instance, I'd recommend taking it earlier in your junior year.
Yep.
The best time to study for this test is June after your sophomore year.
Yep.
And just study all summer if possible and into the school year. I usually start working with students in June, and we can work all the way through May on the SAT or ACT. Ideally, we would finish earlier, but sometimes it drags on to May, and that's okay.
Yep. And tied to that too, I'd say parents and students book multiple testing dates and
Yes.
book them like a few months apart. So we've actually been advising our students, and I want to say back in March, to book them out for the summer and then also for the fall. Ideally you've got, I'd say like 3 testing dates booked, and you can always cancel them afterwards if you're happy with your score.
Yeah, in Northern California, they don't offer enough test dates and testing sites for whatever reason. So we have students who have to take the test. I have a student who's taking the test in Nevada in December.
Yeah.
A student who lives in Northern California, and that's quite a trip. So the sooner you book that test, the sooner you assure yourself a testing spot. These test spots often go pretty quickly, and you can usually change or get a refund if you do it soon enough.
Yep. Yep. Awesome. So now, other question then is, what actually would you consider to be a good score? And I think we could maybe even take a look at like a sample college, and that
Yeah.
could kind of act as our North Star. So I think,
Let's look at Bowdoin.
let's do it. So let me pull
Okay,
up
Bowdoin
Bowdoin.
is a small private school. It doesn't receive a lot of applicants, but 88% of the students there submitted an SAT or ACT score.
So
It is
what do you think the
prestigious.
average SAT score is for Bowdoin? I don't know yet. So
I'll
this is
bet you it's
quiz.
pretty high. I'll bet you it's above 1,400. I would not be shocked if it were 1,500 plus.
Let's see. So I'm looking at Prep Scholar. It is, hold on, let's just quickly share screen. So
It's
it is a
1,400. Yeah,
1422.
1,422.
There you go.
Right.
Yep.
So that's a really high score. before we were test optional, that score would be below 1400,
Yep.
right? It'd be in the 13s somewhere. What is a good score for Bowdoin? Now, if I had a 1350, I would submit that score to Bowdoin. A 1300 would be a tough choice.
Now, wait, how did you get to the 1350?
I want to submit. So Bowdoin knows that these scores are inflated, right? And a 1350, even that's a great score. A 1300 is a great score. So, yeah, it's kind of hard to figure it out. I would say, maybe minus 70 points, minus 60 points from whatever Prep Scholar or whatever website you find.
Yeah, and so actually what you could even do too is, so you have like the middle 50 percentile range, right? That's often reported by these schools. And so for Bowdoin, they've got the 25th to 70th percentile. And so the 1350 is actually within the middle 50 percentile.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
typically if you're like 25th percentile or higher, it would be in your best interest to submit the score. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty standard metric.
Yeah.
Anything below that, you're probably not submitting your score. Now, and it just, yeah, I think Prep Scholar is a great resource. I use it all the time. They're not always 100% updated, but I think their information is very accurate.
Yep. Yeah. And then taking this a step further, so if a student takes multiple tests, I know there's this concept of super scoring.
Yes.
Let's walk through that. So what is super scoring? And while you do that, I'm gonna look it up.
Okay. So super scoring basically encourages students to take the test 2 or 3 times. And what happens when you're super scored is on the SAT, you'll take, let's say you apply to Bowdoin, they'll take your best verbal test and they'll take your best math test, even if they were taken on different days, and those become your new score.
Yep. So here I've got some examples right here.
Yeah.
So this is SAT. So the highest, so this is the dates taken. So 2 test dates taken. There's English, and then there's verbal, and there's math. And so 680 was the higher verbal score, 720 is the higher math score. So you got the 2 of them, you get 1400.
Right. And
yeah, go for it.
My recommendation is usually to take the test 3 times, especially the ACT, because it has 4 different tests.
Exactly. That's a really good point, actually. So, you could actually, like, the first time you take it, you may just crush one section, second time a different section, third time a different section. So it does actually make a lot of sense to take it 3 times. The only thing to keep in mind, obviously, is your mental health and whatever else you've got, focused, whatever else you're spending your time on.
Most of my students only want to take the test twice.
Yep.
The vast majority of my students take the test twice, but I still recommend 3 times.
Yep. Now, most colleges actually super score, but there are some colleges that do not.
Right.
There are some colleges that will ask you for all of your scores. And so for that, so one, don't stress over one or the other, right? I think, and don't let that kind of define what your college list is. But once you kind of know what colleges you are interested in applying to, then you can actually start to do that research and understand which ones super score and which ones require all of your scores.
Right.
Yep. Awesome. So we covered a lot, actually. We covered why take it, why not take it, when to take it, how to study for it, which one to take, when to submit your scores. And then now maybe the last thing too is you mentioned the standardized tests, like they can also, they not only help with admission, but they can also help with other things too, like scholarships.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, you can get scholarships if you get a high enough score on the ACT. Sometimes that can place you out of certain requirements. And that's sometimes only available for students with the ACT.
Yep.
So there are some benefits, but really your job is to start studying after your sophomore year, get your good test, submit it, and then see what happens.
Yep. All sounds great. Any final thoughts, Cole?
No, I mean, I think that most students don't want to take the ACT. I think there's a learning curve that is intimidating, especially on the science section. But I think if you push through and you really study hard, you'll crack that test.
Yep.
It's a much easier test. I highly recommend the ACT.
And we're probably going to see a massive surge in ACT scores being submitted versus the SAT, especially this fall. Or
Yes.
last fall, and maybe even, actually, no, not last fall, but this fall for sure. I think
Yeah.
we're going to start to see that. So awesome. Well, hey, cool. Thank you so much for your time, and everyone else, thanks so much for tuning in and listening or watching this. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Our email is contact@mystrivepath.com. And if you haven't, subscribe to our channel. Thanks again.
All right.